It's a great photo, I reckon. It might be a bit nice to have some person in the sort of front.
We'll have the screen.
This will come up on, yeah, I think.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're dialing in from the US. My name is Rashi Sehgal, and I'm the chair for the WA CIPS Committee, as we know it, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Our topic today is the government procurement capability, the Western Outlook. And we will discuss two effective procurement case study projects during the course. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the Wachuk land and Noongar people. I pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Let us come together and recognize their continuing connection to the land, the waters, and the community. It is my privilege to represent the professional body in CIPS on behalf of the WA Committee. To all those who have joined us for the first time, a very warm welcome for beautiful and windy Perth. And for those who've joined us previously through webinars or face-to-face networking sessions, great to have you back again. We are the global professional body, your partner for life. I really like that tagline because it holds true in terms of how we deliver to our members. We're here to promote the best practice, to raise awareness of the contribution that procurement and supply professionals add to the successes of their organization, and to nurture continuous improvement in professional standards. Today's case studies are an excellent example where we are doing knowledge sharing. It's a great example of collaboration, partnership, and most importantly, the value that procurement has added to the table and long-term sustainability of to the beneficiaries in terms of the stakeholders, the communities, as well as the broader WA state's economy. And before I introduce our wonderful panel, I'd like to engage you in a short poll. We'll have two questions to come up shortly on your screen. So if you could respond, that would be great. Here we go. So the first question is, in your opinion, is competitive public tendering relevant for public sector procurement? We've got three choices there. Yes, it is necessary and relevant for all public sector procurement. No, it depends on the complexity and scope, or not applicable to me. Right, so we've got 72% saying that it is a yes and necessary and relevant vehicle. 28% saying no. Thank you. And our next question, please. So the question is, are you using COVID-19 market disruption to change and improve your procurement activity? Yes, already using, that's your first option. Second, not yet. And third, not applicable. Fantastic. So I think it's all 51% of the participants who've joined are already utilizing and leveraging COVID-19 as a lever for change, for improvement. 39% not yet, and 10% not applicable. Thank you. With that leads me to our brilliant panel. So thank you very much. We've got Andrew Blitz, who's joined us as the Commercial Development Manager for WALGA. He will set the scene for the local government and landscape and procurement structures. Andrew has been a long-serving member for the CIPS community, is an advocate, is a fellow in the WA region as well. And I have the pleasure of having Andrew as our expert moderator across the Q&A segment as well. The two case studies we have, the first one is on the sustainable energy strategy for the Coburn Aquatic and Recreation Centre. Welcome Brett McEwen, who is the manager for the Coburn Arc facility and is joining us on the panel, will be available for your Q&A afterwards. And our second case study is showcasing the City of South Perth Carrier Services. And we've got Jeff Jones, who is the Manager for Information Services of City of Perth, City of South Perth, let me correct that, and has been overseeing the transformation in the technology enabled right from the emails when they were first launched, I guess, a few decades ago. And we've got Joseph Arrigo, who is the founder and Managing Director for Lightspeed Communications Australia. And I think we have over 140 participants who have registered. We would like to hand you over to Andrew at this point. Thank you, Andrew.
That's great. Good afternoon. I am a bit of a procurement tragic and do want to drive a couple of constructive topics through today's broadcast. Those poll results were very interesting. If I can say at the outset, on the first question, let me try and help you change your mind. And on the second one, let's just conclude that the glass is half full, half empty. But we'll look a little bit about that and assess the culture and the capability of public sector procurement and how it can be a positive driver when the right dynamics are in place. What we're going to do for today is firstly give a little bit of an overview or a landscape look at what that procurement is worth and at a helicopter level how it all pulls together. Secondly, we're going to explore those case studies, and then we've got a bit of a discussion across the panel. Quite deliberately, the panellists that are sitting here today are not procurement people. They are the customers of procurement people, the business unit managers. And if you remember the days where we used to go to conferences and network, one of the criticisms that was always thrown out is procurement people are always talking to themselves. We need to start talking a little bit more to our stakeholders, to the people around us. So the focus today is to get those perspectives, to get that insight from the people that receive our services, that benefit from our procurement work, and to take a perspective associated with our infrastructure. I'd like to start off just by giving a bit of an overview of the landscape of the business that we deal with. I can see we're amongst friends looking at the participant list. The procurement community in Australia is small enough, but in the public sector and in local government, and particularly in Western Australia, it's very small. So we'll keep those networks ticking. But the Western Australian local government environment comprises of 139 councils. It's an industry of around about 22,000 people, and the economy of $4 billion is quite significant. It represents about 0.7% of state GDP. So the amount of direct consumption of goods and services hovering around the 1.2, 1.3 billion mark is a very significant spend, and it's important we get that right. If we drill up a little bit and look at the economy nationally, just wait for the next slide. The dynamic around Australia is that there are 537 local government authorities. Interesting to note that if you scale the calendar back about 10, 15 years, in the year 2005, there were over 2,000 local governments in Australia. So many states and territories have been rationalised and amalgamated, and that consolidation is represented in that statistic there. But as a sector, near to 200,000 people, or 10% of what is the entire public sector is local government. The economy there is $38.8 billion, and it's really, if you look at the value of the infrastructure there that sits on local government balance sheet, very, very significant, and obviously a huge amount of technical procurement that sits behind that work. Looking broader beyond local government, the whole of the public sector in Australia, you can see there 18.68%. Round that to 20%, and effectively what you're saying is that $1.05 that gets spent in Australia is spent by the public sector. The direct spend component of that still exceeds 100 billion, and there are three levels of government. There's federal, state and local. So we've seen local government a 10% share of that pie. At the top end, at the federal end, you can see those Oz tender stats there, $64.5 billion a year, and that's really the core federal government departments. The quasi-government activity that sits around that, particularly relating to defence, health, education, very, very substantial, sophisticated procurement. And there's a lot of public trust in the integrity and the transparency of the way that procurement takes place. We've got to get it right. And it's just a way of saying, do we sit back often enough and actually understand what this is worth collectively, what it actually means to Australia's economic enablement, even ultimately to its international competitiveness. Public sector procurement is extremely important, and it impacts the productivity of Australia in ways that we quite often don't acknowledge. The main principle of public sector procurement, I suppose, is that when extending the opportunity to the market, we want everybody to have the opportunity to be able to bid for government business. Competitive public tendering was introduced in its early form way back in the 1960s. Through the process of deregulation around the 80s, it became mandated at all levels of government. But really, for the last 50 years, the main medium of procurement within the public sector has been through tender processes. If you turn the clock back to where it started, they were paper-driven, formal processes. The probity of that process has been fairly steadfast. But today we deal with those processes they're regulated in the same way, but the methodology is quite different. Everything is automated, and dare I say it, there are ways of traversing those processes, being able to utilise those processes in ways that sometimes even skew outcomes. Now, local government, all levels of government, we want to get this right. We want to do the right thing. Tendering has a place where the right dynamics are in the market, but quite often, if we're not dealing with a competitive playing field, if we're not dealing with a well-constructed tender process, tendering can actually not deliver the best value for money outcome. We've got no discretion. We have to tender because that's the way it's set up, but there are other ways around it. For WALGA's footprint, we're very proud to be able to deliver $380 million a year of goods, services and works into the Western Australian local government sector. We can quantify about $32 million of savings, but you can see there our circular economy that collectively we put the sector together and we're able to derive not only through aggregation, but through risk mitigation, through the structure of the medium that we operate, a balance of governance and a balance of value for money. Something we're very, very proud of and something we'll share a couple of examples of today. So I think we're ready to launch into a little bit of the case study stuff, but in thinking through what we're about to see, on the other side of this, we're going to launch a bit of a discussion, and we've got this crystal ball on the table. What does our future look like? And the market has changed quite substantially, even without the COVID factor. How is that going to change even more? And as that changes, how does not only the role of procurement, but the methodology of procurement change with it? And we're going to draw and test out a couple of examples of how we see that future. It's certainly it's a very interesting discussion. There might not be a right or a wrong answer, but certainly a number of issues that do need to be flagged. We do need to call to action in a number of areas. So, without further ado, we'll share our first case study with you now. I'm going to hand over to Brett McEwen, who's the manager of the Coburn Arc, and he's going to tell you about their very successful, very sophisticated infrastructure procurement project.
Great, thanks Andrew, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Just setting the scene, today I'm talking from a business manager's perspective or as a customer of our procurement department at the City of Coburn. What you'll be seeing playing on the screen right now is over 10 years of planning, 3 years of construction, and a lot of detailed procurement planning to get a positive outcome for our community, but also an industry-leading community piece of infrastructure, that being Coburn Arc. The key focus that we're presenting today on is on our solar PV and our energy initiatives at the facility. And to start us off, I'll just give you some background about Coburn Arc, which is owned and operated by the City of Coburn. So it is our newest regional sport and recreational facility located in Coburn Central, an overall development cost of $109 million. It has been developed based on a partnership model. Perhaps some of the most complex procurement activities have surrounded this project, given it was developed in partnership with Fremantle Football Club and Curtin University as a tertiary education provider. It is the single largest capital works project the city's ever embarked upon, and has over $6 to $7 million investments in AEST principles alone, one that you're seeing on the screen right now. From a procurement context perspective, we did have one single procurement officer assigned through to this project, supporting the project working group, my role as the business manager, which was really effective for the city. The building construction was a GMP contract, and the city tendered and broke down various stages and construction elements of this project, including the solar, which was novated over to the builder. In terms of the solar procurements, it's really important for us as business managers, and no doubt for anyone in this field, to have a real common ground and a real effective working relationship with our procurement teams. And that certainly was the case in executing this project that you see in front of you on the screen now. At the end of the day, we are dealing with community money or ratepayers' money, and we're wanting the best outcomes for our community and everyone involved in the process. So in terms of the solar system that you're seeing in front of you now, throughout the inception stages, through feasibility, through business case, procurement were an active stakeholder through the entire process, right through to when we engaged the market, which was through a request for proposal process. Why did we do an RFP instead of an RFT with a clear specification? Brand new facility, no baseline data. We didn't even know how much energy the facility was going to use. And we relied on the market and the specialists within the industry to be able to model based on the facility, based on the infrastructure, based on everything that was being fitted in there, to actually inform what we actually needed as the client and as the customer as well. That was a really effective strategy for us on the solar alone, and we received a number of responses ranging in size, scale and cost, which has really led into the partnership that we have entered into the solar game to develop and implement what you've just seen on the screen just now. In terms of outcomes, just real quickly, because you have seen a number of key stats on the video just now, so I won't repeat them all, but essentially the system's producing almost half of the energy requirements for Coburn Arc, which is a significant reduction in greenhouse emissions and meeting our energy reduction targets. Operational savings of $120,000 a year in network and capacity fees alone. In addition to that, direct savings when we're putting in power reduction on top of that, around $250,000 a year. So very quick payback of around the 5 to 6 years, not including LGC credits and the like as well. So the key component from us for this project to be successful in isolation of the solar, or the project as a bigger picture, was collaboration and development in conjunction with our procurement team. I couldn't achieve that, or my team couldn't achieve that, without having our procurement team on site as well. That's it from me, so I'll hand you back, and there will be questions later on if you do have any.
That's great, thanks Brett. And we have now a video. Alongside me, we've got Jeff Jones and Joseph Arago, who have completed a telecommunications infrastructure project, and have a look at this one.
Hi, I'm Joe Arrigo, owner of Lightspeed Communications, and we do quite a bit of work for City of South Perth in the comms and electrical arena.
Hi, I'm Jeff Jones. I'm the Manager of Information Systems at the City of South Perth. And I sat down with Joe and said, Joe, look, yeah, this is a bit more than than just fibre network. We've got lots of problems here. Yeah, being like a government, we did have to involve our procurement teams. When I did arrive back, procurement had been excluded from most of the conversations in regard to this project. So we took a step back, not to Joe's complete happiness. He wanted to keep moving forward, but I really had to get procurement involved here, so making sure that we followed all the rules and the regulations that we have to abide by. So we involved our procurement team probably within the first month. And it probably took 8-9 months before I could actually sit down with Joe and actually take this to the next step.
And over that, 9 months, probably a year, even more so, we had the chance to sit down and look at costings, and procurement and accounts did come forward and show us a bit more of
the cost. And to make this efficient, you have to dig up our golf course. So it's not the easiest thing to do is to go to your golf course manager and say, look, can I dig a trench through the middle of your golf course?
They were very, very good at the golf course. We walked through and arrived to tell them that we were going to dig up the golf course. And then they talked about possibly putting some lights in place in the future for driving ranges and night golf course, etc.
The aged care facility, Collie Park Village, there was no technology available from the carriers. It's in a dead spot.
With the seniors village, the biggest challenge there was that it actually did have a wireless link from the City of South Perth head office where we're standing right now. But over time, there's a lot of trees in between that had grown up, and obviously the wireless link doesn't work through trees, so there was these intermittent faults. For the City of South Perth to solve that problem was either lease a link from a carrier, which would have been several $1,000s a month, or it ended up being possible to put your own fibre in and have that paid off over several years. And along the way, we got to hook up the golf course and the depot and a few other sites. So
this did require a lot of agility between ourselves and the procurement team. The project kept growing. There was so many unknowns, and every time we hit one of these little hurdles or one of these options, we could go back to the procurement team, and between us, Lightspeed and them, we continued down the path. And like I say, the project kept growing and growing, and the savings has been quite incredible. This project really couldn't have gone ahead without partnership. We could not have done this as a tender. We had to concentrate. We had to work out what opportunities were there, what we could do.
We let the council do what they do best in regards to procurement. I think Lightspeed did what it did best, and we overcome a lot of hurdles.
The original tender wouldn't have built us anything. We really had to be agile and understand all our different problems. If we'd gone out and built the original tender, we would have got a network. But there was things that popped up.
The outcome was phenomenal. I think the city ended up saving $1 million over a 5-year period, which was or 8-year period, I should say, which was exceptional. We're very proud of that.
Joe and myself here on this project, we hit different hurdles, and we needed to extend some of the contracts, and we needed to extend some of the works. So we got WALGA and their procurement team involved in this to make sure what we were doing was sitting inside all the boundaries. And I think you went up there a few times yourself, Joe.
We did. We had meetings with WALGA to make sure that we could do what we were doing, and to be honest, to make the most of it as well. But getting on the WALGA panel isn't the easiest thing, but when you're there, obviously you've got the WALGA tick. It was an advantage to us, and it was an advantage to the City of South Perth.
My operating costs have decreased by $100,000 a year. The payback on the actual fibre project itself was over 2.5 years. So the ongoing savings have been immense, but it is the potential of what we can put on top of this network is where we will make the savings in the end, because projects will become, well, there'll be a lot of savings within each project. We'll have to build this traffic.
I think one of the biggest challenges with the city was getting everybody on board, and we went through a lot of time figuring out where the savings were. And until there was a spreadsheet that sort of gave us a bit of a positive, we could go there. And then once we got to speak to procurement and everybody else, I think that's when the ball started rolling, I think, Jeff.
Yeah, we really didn't get procurement involved early enough. Yeah, they'd been left out of this project to start with. Bringing them in halfway through had a lot of positives. Yeah, they were on board and they worked with us. We weren't fighting our procurement team, even though there was still a delay. I mean, it was 18 months, 2 years. But we got a result. And everyone was happy. The success of this project, one success is that Joe and myself are still talking to each other. I mean, it's been a battle getting this through, Joe, and I know it caused you a lot of frustration.
It was a long-winded project, but one that we're very happy to have in the bank and refer a lot of other councils to look at.
Yeah, Alex, it's been a pleasure working with the partner, and it's actually been a pleasure working with our procurement team and WALGA. You need all the parties involved in here. I can't stress it enough. If you leave one of them out, you don't get a success.
That's great, thanks. The project that you see, both projects in fact, deliver beyond and above expectation. Those relationships, that collaboration is really important. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion now, and I think one of the common themes that came through those case studies is about the early engagement of the procurement team. And I suppose to kick the discussion off, even prior to the commencement of the procurement and its planning, the business units, the people that have those operating budgets, are aware at some point in time that the procurement team needs to be engaged, that there will need to be a conversation and an approach to procurement. Perceptions can be 9/10 of the law, so if we can kick this conversation off by just asking the question, what are those perceptions? Before you go and speak to your procurement people, not only perceptions but expectations. Are you approaching that with trepidation? What is it that you're anticipating when you sit and talk with your procurement team? What is it that they need to do out front to engage and get this process underway? Maybe, Jeff, would you like to kick our discussion off?
So I was going over to Brett there, sorry about that, Andrew. Interpretation, lots. We were in a position where we sort of had this idea in this project and procurement had been involved. And I was trying to understand all the rules. Yeah, we'd heavily invested with Joe's time in helping us plan this, but we really didn't get procurement. And when I initially went there, I was worried that they would push me back to the very start and force me to go through a different process. But as soon as we broke that conversation, broke the ice, we sort of got there. It was tough to prepare how I was going to talk to them.
Fantastic. So, Brett, I suppose the procurement team, they always want to help, they always want to do the right thing. At the same time, if we come back to the procurement governance, there's an obligation to the organisation to, I suppose, protect that local government from risk, to make sure that there is a degree of compliance and balancing the tension between making sure that that rule book does get adhered to, at the same time getting those outcomes, getting that broad business-to-business approach within the project. How did you go with your engagement?
Look, a very good question. At the end of the day, and I've said this before, we are dealing with community money, so it's really important that we do have a risk-based approach with how we award our contracts and deliver value for money through our procurement activities. But it also comes down to having a mutual understanding of what the end goal is and what we're trying to achieve when we're considering a project or an initiative or an outcome. Some of us business managers may get a little bit anxious or a little bit angry when we have to engage with procurement. That's certainly not the case, because they have a role that they need to fulfill, and it's working together with our internal relations to understand what we're trying to achieve and how we can best do that without breaking the rules, but getting the best outcome through the process we follow as well. So early engagement's key for our success, and we'll be going forward, reaching out when we are planning, having an open discussion about what we're trying to achieve and find that common ground really early.
Fantastic. One of the issues that inevitably arises relates to scope creep of the project itself. When we're setting out and preparing our procurement, we think of every contingency, we look at all the scenarios that may evolve, and through our risk assessment try and identify things that may occur or may not occur. But it doesn't matter how much of that type of work we do, there are always going to be instances where things get discovered along the way that hadn't been anticipated, that couldn't be foreseen. We saw with the Lightspeed case study that along the way, the opportunity arose not only to deliver and exceed the expectations of the City of South Perth, but the amenity provided to the aged care, the local golf course, to the community around the local government, was evaluated benefit. And this was just common sense to be able to pick that up and run with it. So I suppose when we're dealing with the issues of scope creep, both walking into the process and on the other side of the process, there are a number of things that we need to consider. certainly prior to the process, the early tender engagement and early tender involvement can help us do as much as we can to identify that stuff. Through the post-procurement, through contract management, obviously there's a huge element of activity that helps us to deal with that. But when we're through the procurement itself and we learn and we discover and we see things along the way, how do we bring that into the process? What can we do that isn't a breach of process to optimise the value of our procurement? Maybe, Joe, can we kick off with a perspective from you as a contractor to the sector?
Yeah, I guess certainly as a contractor, you've got a different perspective because we just want to get the work done, so to speak. But there's the tendering process, which can sometimes be quite long-winded. You can't admit that if you want to do 3 weeks worth of work and you get a tender, and then in terms of conditions, that might be 185 pages, you might not have the money to bring lawyers in to read that. But we found that if you go and speak to procurement, which we have on multiple occasions, and said, look, this scope and these terms and conditions is pretty inundating, this is how we see it. We've had good people to deal with, especially at City South Perth. They were great, the procurement team, and they broke it down. And at first, our terms and conditions actually were basically, well, pretty much 50% of it got removed. And then when we issued our concerns, they said, well, hang on, well, we'll give you progress payments of this, deposit invoices of that, and our risk was removed. So I think if both parties can see and understand what avenue you're trying to go through and try to remove risk, because at the end of the day, tendering process is trying to do that for both parties and somehow find a mutual ground with a lot of discussion, you tend to move forward, and we certainly did on this project and many others.
Thanks.
Andrew, I think we have a question that's best addressed if you could. So what's the process to engage with WALGA for a non-for-profit organisation?
So WALGA puts its contracts to public tender. We're actually in a process at the moment of reforming the supplier engagement process. Maybe we won't get too distracted by that at the moment. I can certainly contact the questioner offline and have that discussion following the webinar. I did want to pick up on Joe's comments and make note that quite often the budget's a big constraint, that there are cost limitations in any given scenario. Unfortunately, when decision-making processes get driven by costs and costs alone, the outcome or the quality of the outcome can be lost. And again, the discussion between procurement, finance, the business units is an ongoing one. We've got to get the best of all worlds, but the public sector procurement, when it's price-driven, when it's cost-driven, quite often there's a gap between anticipated outcomes, desired outcomes, and cost constraints. So I think there are ways that procurement can help, if not completely solve that problem, at least bring the two closer together. Can we have a bit of a chat about that in the context of how we engage the procurement team?
Yeah, look, very good question, and it's going back to what I've referred to before. We, as local governments or state governments or any business, plan our activities well in advance. We'll know what our capital projects are in our long-term financial plan. We have a number of planning obligations we need to meet, being a local government, and it's looking at identifying each project and making sure we've got all stakeholders and parties around the table to ensure we've got the internal capacity to deliver on it. We've got the best procurement strategy. There may be better ways about going or clustering projects together to get a better outcome in terms of project management or procurement resources. And it's just instead of working harder with some projects, it's just working smarter with how we go about our business and plan out our annual planning well in advance with how we're going to deliver and get a much better outcome for our communities and our ratepayers.
Fantastic. Jeff, do you have any views?
I could go back to your first question about the scope creep because it probably leads into it. Our project didn't have scope creep in the sense that a normal traditional project would have. We had a project that was going to put a point-to-point connection between buildings, and we sat procurement and we planned all of that. And then as we looked at other projects in the organisation, we saw there was opportunity to actually save them costings in their projects. So we worked with procurement to actually pull components of each of them 3 other projects, money out of that, pass that on to Lightspeed to actually include it in our project, and that saved them considerable savings as well as saving me savings. So there's a win-win all around. But if procurement hadn't come forward and worked with us, we wouldn't have known about them other 4 projects. So I think it leans into your question in regard to involving procurement. You've really got to work together, and that's what we managed to do very well here.
Fantastic. Joe, do you have any thoughts on scope creep?
I think, coming back to unfortunately, it's as simple as what Jeff said, working together. It took a lot to get this project on board as it was. And then we were running fibre literally through a different suburb, and they had issues with CCTV and the like. There was funding given to that, and I think we probably doubled, if not tripled, the value by just dropping extra fibre calls off to then energise the CCTV in that arena, which obviously brought community safety down, or improved, I should say, and surveillance. And by knowing what else is happening within the council, we deal with other councils where we have monthly meetings with different departments to say, well, this department's doing this, that department's doing that. How can we combine it together and try and get $3 out of every dollar they spend? So definitely communicating with everybody. Communication is key.
Thanks for that, Joe. We've had a question in from our esteemed former Global Chair, Craig Lardner, and thanks for keeping us on our toes, Craig. We have the need to, I suppose, optimise and maximise the engagement with procurement in a way that delivers the outcome, but at the same time gives regard to the procurement governance. I think in the public sector, procurement governance is an area where we don't have a lot of critical focus, or certainly not enough, that there's a separation within the decision-making process, within the procurement planning process, the evaluation, the contracting, so on and so forth. And I think walking into these procurement processes as well, the tone of the conversation can depend on effectively what is that door of entry. Sometimes we're talking to finances about budgets, sometimes we're looking at integrated planning, we're looking technically at forward works programs, we could be talking procurement, we could be talking sustainability. Any one number of issues can drive the tone and the entry point of that discussion. And really, to harness the collective power of all elements, all aspects of the project, we need to be talking about all of that. And we also need to make sure that the governance is robust and sound. It's a check and a balance, but it's also not driving outcomes in a way that may be limiting in their construct. And I suppose we referred to that a little bit before as well. But I think if I can throw out to the panel here the topic of procurement and governance, and really ask about the level of reliance. How do we approach the discussion and get the best of both out of process and project at the same time?
Want to go first?
We ask the hard questions.
Again, and I've said this a few times, at the end of the day, we are dealing with community money. My rates contribute to a lot of great things within my local community, and we do need to be accountable for how we deal with community money as well. In terms of governance, in local government space, obviously we have a number of processes, systems in place to ensure that we do the right process. And as a local government officer or an employee working there, it's important that I and our team follow them to demonstrate good governance, good decision making, and robust processes to get the best outcomes for our community as well. So in terms of the question around governance, and hopefully I'm responding appropriately to this, it really is different from each local government. Whilst the overall objective is complying with the legislation, best value for money, supporting local, whatever each local government's procurement policy strives for, it's really important for us as local government officers to follow the right process to get the best outcome. Those systems are in place to protect us, they're there to protect the community, and we should always be doing the right thing and should be pulled up if we're doing the wrong thing in the governance space around procurement activities, purchasing, whether that's a petty cash purchase, whether it's a credit card or whether it's a $100,000 contract, it's still at the end of the day dealing with community money, and we should be accountable.
Brett did make a great comment there. Each local government is different. The what we've seen over the last 20 years in local government is every time we're on the front page, or local government's on the front page on paper, governance tightens up. And I think it's got to a stage where the governance is got so far in protecting every party that we've actually started to not enable business to do its work in an easy manner. So I think we really need a review of this governance process inside procurement and work out, are we reacting because a few people are doing the wrong thing and the rest are doing the right thing, and enabling and put some checks in place that actually protect from a different perspective than how we actually work with our partners. So I really believe we're in a stage where we have to sit back and work out what we are, what we're doing as a procurement team to enable business to develop.
Joe? I think from a contractor point of view, governance is remarkable for a word from a tendering point of view. I think one of the last tenders we did, which was quite a large one, we did actually win it. Now, we've been doing work for this council beforehand. It was in excess of 586 pages, which is pretty crazy, but the specification requirement as well as the justification to say I can put a conduit on a wall and this is how we do it, it's above and beyond. Obviously, we're trying to mitigate risk from the council's point of view and possibly from ours as well. I don't know how else to do it. It's very hard to win those sort of tenders. You wouldn't want to do that as your first one. And the only way to go about it is obviously dipping your toe in the water and possibly engaging a tendering company to help you put your tenders together. I don't know if they'll ever reduce the amount of requirement that a tender asks for. I doubt it. That it can be very overwhelming. You have to start from the bottom up. I don't know how else to answer the question, but I was only one person when I started my company. Now I'm over 15 and we're Australia-wide, so we must be doing something right.
I'll just add something here. I think the long and short of working with governance, the right level, the right way, is really building the trust in the process itself.
Yep.
Whatever the scale and complexity we're dealing with, if we have trust in the process, we can see governance operate to the right outcomes.
Just picking up on Joe's point, and at the risk of, dare I say it, becoming controversial or dangerous, we quite often have dynamics in the market that balance out demand and supply. And with the best of intent, local governments will put processes out to market, but the way those processes are presented can sometimes be inhibitors, not enablers. And where there are incumbent arrangements and relationships and the cost of changing supplier is all too hard, where there are specifications that may weight or lead towards particular dispositions, that's not good procurement. And we have had a number of instances on very high profile projects in Western Australia, some of them outside the realm of local government, and you can read plenty about them. But we've had situations where ultimately suppliers will throw their hands in the air and say, we don't think we're with a genuine chance of being able to win this bid. We're not going to bother to respond because the resource and the cost and the administration associated with bidding for this business is a high risk to us. We're quite happy to do it if we're within a genuine scope and opportunity of being in the race. But if we feel that maybe we're just there as window dressing, then we're going to look at other opportunities in other industry sectors. And I know it's a very cynical approach to take, and it's quite often not fair dinkum, but there is a dynamic out there, and sometimes the ultimate effect of that can be that local government markets are monopolised because the future number of suppliers with experience, qualifications and capability within a sector become limited. So it doesn't happen all of the time. It might not be even intended some of the time, but where that dynamic exists, what is it that we need to do within the public sector procurement space to broaden those procurement processes, to really give the market the intention of being able to bid for business, extending that opportunity to the whole market and keeping that market competitive? Some thoughts?
I think, Andrew, if I made a comment on that, there are some councils within the Perth arena, and I know that they'll actually have workshops trying to teach younger companies, I've got to say, or inexperienced companies with tendering. They actually have tendering workshops, and you go along And I've been to a couple of those, and there's been a lot of aha moments for companies that haven't even understood the whole tendering process. So councils put things out and they think, well, everybody knows what they need to do, justify your rationale and your background, and we should get the right tender back. My first tender for a very, very large council was 3 pages long. We won it on past experience, but when I went in, they said this is the worst tender we've ever been submitted, and they had to go to council and justify it for us. From then on, we went and got people involved and asked them what we do better, and I was thoroughly walking out of the room with my tail between my legs and very embarrassed, but we learned. I think if procurement and local councils can offer those opportunities to the contractor to come and learn how to tender and educate the client in a sense, or the subcontractor, that would be a good start, I think.
Fantastic. Brett, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is something that a lot of local governments will provide support to local enterprise and business with, how the procurement process works, how to write a tender, the evaluation process that we go through. And I'll put my hand up, as local government operators, we don't make things easy through the tender process. We'll go out with a 40-page specification, general conditions of contract, and a number of requirements when we go out to markets. One thing that I personally get a lot of value out is doing mandatory briefings or a tender briefing, whether that's through a video conference or in person. It just sets the scene, sets the context for the marketplace, and gives a common ground around what the city or what the local government is looking for as well. And that's what we do with majority of our tenders or competitive tender processes. We'll have a mandatory briefing either online or in person, and that just gives an opportunity to understand the players, understand potential respondents, and give really good information to get a better response from the marketplace as well. And it's really important when you are responding to the questions, be really clear, concise with submitting in your tender, because it does take a long time when we're evaluating a tender with 20 responses and having to go through every single question and score every question. We acknowledge how tough it can be submitting a tender. The evaluation process is a whole nother level when we're going through that as well. So yeah, absolutely agree with what you're saying.
I'm going to probably continue on from my last comment, which is about the governance of procurement, working out, what we are there for and how we do it. But I'd add in, we really have to look at how we partner with vendors as a business. How do we allow that into the procurement space so we can actually come up with solutions, working with them, and not always paying for someone to do that. That really takes the cost away from what we're trying to build. So yeah, partnerships are probably what I think we should be pushing for in the future somehow.
Absolutely. And some of the drivers, particularly in the social procurement space, are becoming much more evident and stronger, greater aspirants for the sector as well. So the way they get built into what we're trying to achieve is starting to show itself in the form of real value. If there are any last questions or comments, please keep the chat rolling.
So I've got a question here.
Sure.
On the general comment or question, Joel. Panelists, are local government organisations in WA considering or already using agile procurement approaches, especially in these COVID-19 times, to help reduce the tendering cost, admin and time burden?
Absolutely, and there are a number of initiatives at local government level driven towards local economic enablement. At WALGA's end, we, with great haste, deployed the vendor panel marketplace facility with 8,000 local businesses given access in real time for local government engagement based on stimulus requirements. The rule book has been relaxed a little bit. We've had a change in tender threshold. I think every procurement team that I'm talking to is looking at their processes, revising their policies and looking to drive agility within their procurement. It's not easy because the regulation book is still fairly thick, but we're working our way through, and I think we've come a long way. And it's a great point to make.
Can I add on to that, Andrew?
Sure,
you're right, WALGA did move very quick, but local governments, with our policies in place, probably didn't move as quick.
Yeah.
So you created an ability for us to move quicker, but our procurement slowed us down a bit at the same time. So we couldn't actually harness on what WALGA were doing.
Yep.
So we've got to make sure that we're not creating policies in local government that don't at least align with what WALGA and even the state government with their CUA contracts. we've got to work together in putting things in place so we can be agile.
And at the start of the discussion, we asked the question, what is that future going to look like? We're not on the other side of COVID yet. In Western Australia's case, yes, we had a lockdown. We weren't greatly impacted by a health crisis, but we certainly have had economic and market disruption. And we're not on the other side of it. The full impact has to be felt. So whilst we're in the middle of this, we're still struggling to answer a few of those questions and to drive forward, but there's no doubt that procurement in the local government sector on the other side of this will not look the same as it did beforehand, and I think that there is a unity of purpose within that. What I'd like to do is just offer the panel a final comment and one last question, and that is, if you had an ideal relationship between your business units and, from Joe, your perspective from a supplier's point of view, with the procurement team within local government, what's that relationship going to look like? And moving into the future, you know, what elements of change do you see within that relationship with your procurement team?
Really great question. Yeah, go first. I'm going to piggyback off of a question I can see up there in the chat around hard and soft skills. Usually when you're dealing with a procurement manager or a procurement advisor or someone in procurement, they have great hard skills. They know how to do a process, they know how to use a system, they know how to advise you on the process, but soft skills are very lacking in terms of understanding the personality, the people, emotional intelligence and what they're trying to achieve. So I guess in my world and an ideal relationship with procurement, that there is that right mixture of hard and soft skills, process driven, but also understanding the people that you're dealing with. If you're dealing with someone that has a major workload and has 10 multidisciplinary priorities that they're working on, to hear that they have to do a 50-page report or recommendation reports may not be the best approach to go about it with that person. So it's having the right mix of those hard and soft skills to have a really highly effective working relationship whilst complying with the legislation and procurement policy, because we fully understand the scrutiny that local government is under by the Auditor General and everyone involved. We understand that as the end user, but a highly effective relationship makes sure that we're all singing from the same song sheet, but also understand the why behind why certain things are in place as well.
So, Joe, you addressed a couple of the points before, but for your procurement team engagement, what is it that can we do better?
Allow us access to them, which is a very opening statement comment, because procurement are normally hidden away. No one's allowed to talk to them. Don't talk to them directly because they're hidden by governance and rules and terms and conditions. Once you've won the project, or in the, you know, at the end of towards the finishing line, that's normally the first challenge. The first stoppage is, oh, here's the terms and conditions and this is how you need to do it, which is normally against what you've submitted the job. And then you've got to speak to your project manager and say, listen, we need to talk to procurement and they need to understand why we're doing this. And if the door is open to procurement then, or the parties that are obviously standing by their rules and they understand your point of view, generally it's a win-win. But a lot of people would turn around and say, well, no, you can't speak to procurement. We generally like, well, if we can't, this has become really challenging and this is why. And if everybody understands it, sings the same song sheet as Brett was saying, is generally progression forward. And that's exactly, definitely 100% what happened on this project, because it was a 2.1 year payback. It took almost 3 years to get the go ahead on it. And Lightspeed was so invested in it that there was times we wanted to throw it out the window, but we were so invested, it's like, well, hang on, we've got to get this across the line. And when it did, it ran so smoothly and so fast, it was almost fun.
Jeff?
I'm probably just going to jump on the back of what Brett said and what Michael put up earlier. The soft skills, procurement are seen as, you know, and not every procurement team, but as a group generally, they're seen as the people who protect us and that hard line. The soft skills, I think, is really, you know, where you need to go work out how we work with it. How do we make it feel like we're working together instead of us coming up with ideas? You procurement putting a block there, we go back and think about, okay, we do it this way. Let's work together, bring the soft skills and make yourself feel like a team that is that is wanted to be worked with, not there to just protect us and annoy us sometimes.
Fantastic.
Can I say that? Annoy us?
Absolutely. Some wonderful, challenging points and key themes there. To wrap this up and provide some concluding comments, I'd just like to leave the discussion with 3 salient points that I think are really important to the way in which we progress with public sector procurement per se. The first one is back on that issue of tendering, that we need to acknowledge tendering is a means to an end. It's not an end within itself. It's an effective medium, but not always an effective medium. So although we have to tender, the way in which we approach that market and look beyond the traditional forms of tendering to optimise the value, look at the entry and exit points of the process itself, I think there's room to manoeuvre there, and even, dare I say, call into question the need to mandate tendering in every instance where not every dynamic will fit the tendering. At the moment, that issue's out of our hands, but at the same time, there's a lot that we can do to advocate for deriving best value, preserving the integrity, preserving the openness of that process, and at the same time, driving value. The second relates to the comments we made regarding procurement governance. And really, it's a call to action to say that governance is not just about process and policy. It's very, very much about organisational culture. It's about relationship management, and it's about how we can get that governance working and at the same time be good at the business of procurement. The art of good procurement is getting that best value outcome, and when the process constrains us and doesn't enable us to achieve that, maybe we've got something to discuss. And then finally, quite often, the nature of public sector procurement is that we only get to see the bad news. It's only those few procurements that go wrong that end up on the front page of the newspaper. And for all the other stuff, people just expect and accept that things go right. And 99.5% of our activity might go to plan, might deliver fantastic outcomes, but we just take it as a given. And we looked at the start at the scale and the value and the scope of public sector procurement and what it actually means in economic terms to Australia. So it would be fantastic for all of us in local government procurement and every level of public sector procurement to take some satisfaction and to celebrate our successes and to really showcase more of what we do well, because we see it, we know it, we live and breathe it every day. We tell it to ourselves, but we only tell it to ourselves. So it's time for procurement to really drive beyond its own remit, to talk to every stakeholder, which in local government's world is every constituent in the community, and to really say, this is what we're doing in trust with your money to be able to deliver fantastic outcomes for the community. We've seen 2 great examples of that today. There are many, many more, and let's keep sharing it out. So thanks once again for participating in this conversation today. We look forward to further engagement, and back to you, Rashi.
Thank you, Andrew. That was fantastic, and I love the way you've summed up the key takeaways for today. Thank you to a wonderful panel. Thank you, Joseph, for all your patience, hard work, and working through. Jeff, Andrew, and Brett. And thank you to all of you who've joined us from Australia, New Zealand, and Bhutan as well. We'll hope to see you engage at the local LinkedIn forums for WA and Connect and Exchange. See you at the next one. Bye for now.